just a few questions. And Ciara or Sarah, which one of you would like to go first? All righty, I'm gonna pick eeny, meeny, miny. Sarah goes first. Okay, Sarah,
Okay.
tell us about your experience and background in the outdoors and how that led you or didn't lead you to Audubon, Vermont.
Yeah, so I feel, at least from the folks around me, my path was a little bit different in that as a kid and like a young adult, mostly until halfway through college, I really didn't pay attention all that much to the outdoors. Like I enjoyed spending time outside and, like doing recreational activities, but I wasn't really in tune to what was around me. Like I didn't know any of the names of the trees or birds, and those things were kind of just givens. I didn't really think about, the complexity of them all. And then I started farming between the summers of college, and I was getting paid in some veggies to farm and weed. And it was just so nice to be outside every day and like that tangible progress of pulling weeds. And I was like IDing new plants and pests that were near them. And that was like kind of my entryway into wanting to know everything, which is impossible, but I'm trying. I have a little log that I keep now, kind of like a life list, but like not in a competitive way, of all of the different species that I encounter that are new to me, whether they're common, rare, whatever. It's always exciting to see something new. But how that brought me here, I've been an environmental educator now, I think for 6 years, in different capacities as like an intern and then as a full-fledged educator, and now with Audubon for the past 2 years. But before Audubon, most of my experience was in farm-based education, and that definitely overlaps with a lot of the teaching that we do here. But what we teach at Audubon definitely has more of a naturalist and natural history approach. And that was really what I was interested in coming in, that I kind of had these teaching skills that I could bring to Audubon. And I knew that obviously being around other teachers, you always pick up new tips and tricks. But really it was like the fact that I would be surrounded by these experts in environmental education and conservation and policy that I could just like pick the brains of and learn all of these cool different birds and, like really get to know the property while I'm teaching. And that's mostly what's brought me here. And that's great. I've learned now that I am maybe leaning more towards conservation, since my passion does seem to be more about, what's out in the environment. But I have so enjoyed facilitating connections between the kiddos that we work with. We have 3 to 5-year-olds twice a week, and then 6 to like 9, but they could be 12. They just are trending a little bit younger this year. But my role really has been, and I take it seriously, is, making sure that they do get that introduction, because I think back on my childhood and I'm like, wow, if I had, an experience like Audubon, or an adult who maybe explored some of the curiosities I had about our stream in the front yard or the deer that would come, like, I wonder if some of these things would have peaked sooner. So to be able to provide that for kids is really, really great. And also all of them are little naturalists. I'm always surprised at how much they already know.
How much they pick up? Well, and you had to do this during the pandemic. So how much of your time is spent reminding them to keep their masks on and just keep their little foam noodles between each
Honestly, not that much time. I feel it's easier with the kids who go to other programs. They're really good about keeping their masks on and probably have more practice with keeping distance and such. But more like the little ones, like if they're actually 3 years old and they're coming to Audubon, that's just like also not developmentally super appropriate for their age anyway. So we do have to either like, pull it up for them or constantly remind them like, your mask is down, your mask is down. Like a broken record. But yeah, it's been a really great opportunity to also just let them interact with each other, since they're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, well, I think it's so cool that we've been able to do some in-person programming for little people. Well, Ciara, how about you? Your early experiences with outdoors, and how did that lead you to Audubon?
Yeah, I definitely don't think I would have considered myself an outdoorsy person as a child, just because of what I thought defined being an outdoorsy person. I grew up always playing outside. I grew up in the suburbs in New Jersey. So like a different type of outside than Vermont for sure. But I think you know, I thought of being outdoorsy as like being a Boy Scout and going hiking and camping and skiing. And those aren't things that I grew up doing. I just grew up like playing in the mud. But I, at whatever age, around like 10, got very into being like an environmentalist. And I was like, I am going to save the world. And so like, I feel like 10 years old is like around the age where Halloween costumes tend to be what you want to be when you grow up. And when I was 10, I dressed up as a protester for Halloween. um, and like my 5th grade yearbook, when it's like, what's your like favorite book? Mine was How to Stop Global Warming for Kids. So I like decided very young that I was going to be an environmentalist in whatever capacity that meant. And I think for a really long time, I like moved forward with that as a part of my identity without like really conceptualizing like what that meant in terms of like a career or like finite actions. I was just like, I'm gonna save the world. And it wasn't until like sophomore year of college that I started getting into birding through classes at UVM and through a program where I was like mentoring a kid and going birding with her once a week. And I like stayed with the same kid in that mentoring program for 2 full years. So I like developed a very close bond with her. And then one of my friends who was in that course with me for a long time was an intern before me, my friend Henry. And he's who recommended that I apply to be an intern here at Audubon. And so I started here January 2020, which is weird to think that I started pre-COVID. Yeah, and then I wasn't here last summer when there weren't interns, but I came back in the fall and have been chugging along through this pandemic.
That's great.
Environmental education, yeah.
Well, it's fun too. I loved your thought about Henry too. I think it's one of those things that I think all of us underestimate. We all think, like, who's going to listen to me? What do I know? But you can help shape people's lives, just by sharing your own experience and offering them things that went well for you. And they, people can choose to follow that path or not. But sometimes they do, and that can be that's kind of a way of enriching each other's lives. Anyway, so enough preaching. Sarah, so you have been working on some really cool projects, and I kind of want to describe all the cool projects you've been working on for you, but that's not the format, so I'm just going to let you do it.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. One of the projects that has been on my brain recently is Adopt a Trail. So over the summer last year, around July, we created this program where community members are encouraged to adopt a trail, which basically means that you now have the responsibility of making sure that, the trail conditions are walkable and safe. And if you're really into it, then some of the people who have like construction background and stuff, I asked them to maybe look for ways to mitigate flooding or erosion, depending on what their passions were. And I'm excited that we have a bunch of nest boxes on the property. And now I have 2 actually early childhood educators who are going to come together after teaching and split the property up to monitor all of our nest boxes. So that's nice that we're getting to connect with educators in that way. And maybe we can like give some resources to them to show like what they're doing with their class. Another thing that I'm sure.
We'll find out that all the bird boxes are full of house wrens. Is that what's the result going to be?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's going to be a lot of dummy nests in them. But I think one of the projects that David was alluding to is the phenology project, which it kind of feels like it's been looming over me since I first started. I took a course last year with the US National Phenology Network, which they certify people to become local phenology leaders. And if you hadn't heard of phenology before, it's basically just the study of the timing of life cycle events for plants and animals. So if you've ever noticed leaves changing in the fall or flower buds opening, then you have observed phenophases, which is just another word for a life stage. And this is a really, really cool type of science because it allows us to see how climate change is affecting the landscape in real time. And like how a blooming or leafing time might affect the caterpillar population later. Like if things leaf too soon, then the caterpillars might not hatch in time and maybe miss it to other insects and things like that. So we have the opportunity to hopefully start a walk at our center that will label different plants that we're interested in collecting data on, whether that's something that is culturally important, economically important, or just a species that we know we want to keep tabs on because it's going to be vulnerable to climate change. And that's really exciting. We're going to have, like I said, like hopefully an in-person walk soon where folks can actually come to the center and take observations themselves. And I'll be leading little walks about how to do that so that folks know how to do that. And then we'll also have a digital, like a virtual walk as well with a story map where we'll like put so much information, really cool information. It'll basically take you to different habitats around Audubon and tell you a little bit about the different species you can find there, maybe some of the land changes that are happening. Like we have near the beaver pond, like a big landslide happen, or the river trails are sadly but slowly eroding. So all of that information would go in there. So it'd be like a climate hub about the Audubon Center, which is so cool and valuable. And our big dream, because it gets even bigger and more complex, is that we will partner with Signs of the Seasons from the University of Maine Extension. And they have a statewide program that now they've partnered with New Hampshire. So it's between two states now where they're encouraging folks to just take observations in their backyards, like set up a site. So if you had like maple trees that you wanted to monitor, then you would use their app to track all of the different phenophases that it was going through. So we've been in talks with them, and hopefully we can partner to become kind of like the Northern New England phenology network and really start to gather that climate data across the landscape, which again, like so cool. Haven't really seen any other projects that cover that big of a space. And I think
scientists can use this data, right? Like this is real data.
Yeah, this is real data. The website has visualization tools. They've been published in several studies about how things are happening right now. I think specifically there was one about monarch caterpillars that came out last year. But yeah, this will give us real data to work with and help us inform some of like the other citizen science projects that we're doing too. So I'm really excited about that. And
I think about like all the things I hate about technology and worry about with the internet. I think we all do, from fraud to whatever, Bitcoin, you name it. Like it all just worries me. But something like this, you think like, wow, this is so awesome. Like that we could have all these little mini naturalists running around the landscape collecting data that is nothing any scientific team could ever afford, and creating this rich trove of data that could inform, new learning.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And hopefully we'll get it up soon. We'll go back to our roots, like channel Aldo Leopold and Thoreau taking phenological notes of all the different changes happening. And another one that I'm excited about, but I'll talk about a little bit later, is I have started, and Ciara is a part of this, auditing our bookshelf to make it more of an anti-racist bookshelf, because, before we were mostly just doing field trip programs where you would see kids one time and then probably not again until maybe they came next year with a different class. So most of our books tend to be nonfiction picture books about animals and ecosystems and things. So we were looking for not only different content about like social emotional learning, but also, like who are writing the books, and just being more intentional about like amplifying BIPOC voices. So that's another one that I'm really excited about, but I'll save it for another question.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
You're a living example of how one single person can really change an organization, which is awesome.
Thanks.
Well, Ciara, how about for you? What do you work on that's exciting you?
Well, this has been one of my primary projects recently that I've been working on. So I'm really excited about this whole week coming together and like seeing a lot of familiar faces out there. And I'm excited for the events we have coming up for the rest of the week. Something else that I've been really excited about. So when I started here last January, like pre-COVID, I had this project idea where I was like, I want to lead nature walks for folks in addiction recovery. And that was something I was really interested in doing. And then COVID kind of, threw everything for a loop. But the one benefit that's come out of it is now I've had the opportunity over the past year or so to be writing a literature review on research I'm doing on nature-based mindfulness as an aid for folks in addiction recovery. And so I'm excited to like mobilize that research a little bit more, and hopefully at the end of spring have like a webinar Zoom type event where I would like invite community members to come and just kind of like open that discussion up and look at like what research is out there and what like what's the word I'm looking for, boundaries like are in the way of that accessibility, like looking at private rehab facilities like that might start to integrate nature-based mindfulness that's not necessarily accessible for folks trying to integrate this into their day-to-day life, and looking at how it like impacts people of different races very differently, and it is a class issue, and mental health in general I think can just benefit from being outside, and I'm really excited to further that research.
That's very cool. Thanks, Ciara.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I want to call out Nick's message about, holding up the suburbs of New Jersey are not an, environmental wasteland. My grandparents used to live in northern New Jersey in Chatham, and they used to take me on bird walks and nature walks in the Great Swamp, which is a really amazing resource in that part of the country if anyone hasn't been there. But yeah, New Jersey is far from there's a lot going on in New Jersey. Well, the pandemic, right, has affected all of us in lots of different ways, but specific to kind of your work, Sarah, with Audubon and your relationship with nature and the outdoors, how has the pandemic changed it for better or worse?
Definitely one thing for the better is it was just so comforting. So when the pandemic started, it kind of was just at the beginning of spring. So, we were starting to observe some seasonal changes, and it was just really, really comforting to see that the landscape was just changing the same way it did every year and it was like, that was still staying constant. Whether like the pheno phases and all of that, if I wanted to get into that, maybe it was blooming a little bit differently, but like the crocuses were outside and I could see leaves starting to open their buds and eventually leaf out. And just knowing that that would keep going, even though the world felt like it was imploding in every single type of way, was really nice. It also was just a really nice practice of mindfulness. Like where I live in Burlington, I live right next to a park where there's a bunch of Norway maples, which are not a native species, but at least lots of the birds here still like them. There's nuthatches, and I even saw a pileated woodpecker outside of my window, a red-bellied woodpecker. Like, what are you doing in downtown Burlington? I don't really care though, please stay. And I also saw lots of little tiny birds like ruby-crowned kinglets. Didn't know what those were before the pandemic, but now they were all like energetically buzzing through the trees outside my window. So at least in that sense, I feel like my senses were heightened to how the landscape was changing. And I was like able to better connect with that too, since I was at home and I could go and take a midday walk over at my local park a few times a week and kind of see specifically there how things were changing too. And that was nice because definitely, like a lot of us, like my mental health totally dipped, and I was struggling to find some motivation to get outside, and knowing that spring migrants were coming back or new wildflowers were sprouting up, like I didn't really want to see people. They were scary at that time because I was like, no germs. But all of the things that I loved beforehand were still out in nature waiting. So
including that family of squirrels that you had such a good experience with.
Yeah, except the squirrels, I would say they didn't provide me that that I looked for from the other things. There was a family of squirrels eating my suet all winter long, and I kind of took it upon myself they were my nemesis. I had like a stick going out the window. I tried water, not when it was too cold. I'm not a monster. I don't want them to freeze, but nothing worked. I hissed at them. It was really embarrassing.
How many of you seen that video of the guy that like tried to come up with a way to defeat squirrels? Has
No,
anyone not
I
seen
want
it?
to.
All right, I'll see at some point a break here while someone's chatting. I will see if I can't find that video because that is super fun. The squirrels turn out to be absolutely brilliant. They're undefeatable.
No, yeah, they would wait. They would plot and wait out of reach and come back when they knew I wasn't at the window anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. I think Vermont squirrels are smarter too. They have to be. Well, like all of us, right? Ciara, so how about for you? How has the pandemic affected your connection with the outdoors and nature?
It's changed it a lot. And like, I feel like there's been pros and cons to that. I think for better or worse, COVID slowed me down a lot. And I feel like I've actually been birding less over the past year than I had for previous years in my life. And as like hard as that's been, I feel like recently within the past like month or so, realizing how my relationship to birding has changed has helped me reclaim my identity as a birder. I feel like pre-COVID, I fit in with like a very like competitive league of birders, and I was like a 5 a.m, like, oh my gosh, did you get that rare bird alert? Like, let's go. And I'd have like my 4 friends in the car, and they were like photographers too, and it was like very list oriented and like getting the birds oriented. And like it was fun for sure. And that's not to say that I'll never go back to that and that those aren't like adventures that I cherish, but it isn't something that always was like nurturing and beneficial to my mental health. And I think that there was a lot of elitism there. And it was also difficult, I think, birding mostly with like cishet white men and not always feeling like I fit in with that crowd of like people that collected things like lists, and it felt like it came out of a deeper culture of white supremacy, and I think that a lot of elitism in birding does. And this past year I've struggled a lot with depression and anxiety and my mental health, and it was hard to, I wasn't waking up at 5 a.m to go birding because I was like having a hard time motivating myself to take out the trash. And so then it became more of like, how was I going to connect with something that I love so much and like my passion without like putting myself down for it. I think a lot of times I was guilting myself for not doing a better job as a birder rather than seeing birds in a way that was more accessible to me at the time. And so I wrote a few articles a couple months ago about crows because they kind of became my like at-home depression bird a little bit. I actually just made a life-size paper mache crow, which was really exciting. But like, yeah, being able to see what I was seeing out my window rather than like getting to new places, it like there is a loss there, but there's also a big gain, like I feel like in connecting to my neighborhood and what birds are in my neighborhood and having a different perspective on how people connect with nature and where we can find green space, and the fact that like you don't need to go somewhere at 5 a.m to see some cool birds. And I am grateful for that change, even if it has come at the expense of some other things.
Of your life list of like
Yeah,
reaching 5 million or whatever the list is, right?
I'll still get there.
I know it's like just
Slower.
well, that's cool. Well, yeah, on the crows thing, have any of you been keeping up with the Vermont news out of Rutland? The Rutland High School mascot was the Raiders. I've lived in Vermont a bunch of years, and forever it's been the Raiders. And I don't know that I ever really connected it with anything racist, but it has a racist history. And the kids at the school, the students at the school picked up on that, and they had a petition, and they wanted to change it, and divided the community, and there was like big debates, and the city council was divided. But at the end of the day, they changed the name from the Rutland Raiders to the Rutland Crows. No, Ravens, Rutland Ravens. I know crows are not ravens, but they're closely related. So it seemed like a natural segue. Anyway, I've been one of the interns right now who's working with us, Sophia, and I are conspiring about maybe writing, now that it seems like the dust has settled around a little bit, of writing a congratulatory note to the city of Rutland and get it published in the Rutland Herald that says, so cool that you named your high school mascot after the raven. And here's like, and draw from, like these great articles about how brilliant ravens are. Anyway, all right. So segue, maybe that's not a bad transition point too, to talk about the next topic, which is, we're at this interesting, fascinating moment in Audubon's history where a lot of things are coming together. People's understanding of the history of John James Audubon and the declaration of David Yarnell that we are aspiring to become an anti-racist organization, some of the national publicity that calls into question the organization's commitment to doing that and to the way it treats its own employees. There's a lot swirling around in there. So in all of that, Sarah and Ciara, like what's it been like? You're in this fascinating place, you're relatively new to Audubon and this family, and like, how's that affecting your relationship with the organization?
I guess one big takeaway I've had throughout all of this change and then also lack thereof is that, sometimes your own personal morals and beliefs just aren't, expressed at the highest level of an organization and an executive team. And that's not specific to Audubon, that's across nonprofit and probably lots of places that will work. And also, I want to say that National Audubon Society and Audubon Vermont, while Audubon Vermont is under the National Audubon Society, like obviously we're different. And it's been really nice for what disappointment I've had at the national level. I feel, at least at the state level, I always feel comfortable raising points during staff meetings or like suggestions that I have, and I don't fear retribution or anybody, coming back at me. Most of the time, everybody is pretty receptive and either has more questions about, like, how do we make this happen, or just willing to have conversations and hard conversations too. We kind of took a hiatus, but back over the summer, I had started it was kind of like a brown bag lunch type thing, but more of a lunch and learn. We would all read an article, or we did read How to Be an Anti-Racist together as a staff, and we would either meet about those chapters or whatever article we had sent and discuss those. And also, as things would come up from the national level, David would also organize meetings for staff to get together and talk about some of the things that were happening at higher levels. One of the things more recently that I was excited to see from National Audubon, but then kind of disappointed on the follow-up, was you should read them if you haven't yet. There's two wonderful, insightful articles written by Dr. Drew Lanham about John James Audubon's racist legacy. And the first one more goes into depth about his own family history and racist tendencies. And then the second one asks the question, why are we called Audubon still? And what are the repercussions of still going by that name? And I kind of expected after Audubon was the one to publish this article that there would be some sort of internal discussion about, what are the next steps? And maybe there is at the executive level, but not at least in a transparent way for the rest of us. And I definitely would have liked to see, like, here's an article that went out, and here are, like some next steps that we're going to take, and like expect to talk about this in the coming months. Because to me, it's straightforward. I mean, if a name is causing people pain, then you change it. But also, I know that Audubon is a very old organization, and it's taken a long time to get that brand recognition. But I think that there is some happy medium where we can change it. But also, like I said, like one of the advantages of being at a state office means that we can always do more. If we're passionate about something or think that something needs to be done, then like we do have that freedom to do it at the state level. And we've had several trainings and opportunities, not only just around racism and anti-Blackness, but also about gender. And we've actually, with Ray, we created a new program for the chimney swift monitoring project that's happening soon in the spring called Birding Buddies that we're hoping to probably expand to other opportunities as well. But we just, never, well, maybe not never, but it didn't dawn on us in a mostly white office and mostly white birding space that some folks might not feel comfortable going out around dusk looking for birds, or, like maybe walking around the boundaries of a private property and being able to just, or maybe you're just new and you're feeling uncomfortable. That's also why that's there. And you would fill out a form and we would link you up with somebody in the area so that you two could go together. Again, with COVID, that didn't end up happening, but hopefully this year there's a safe way to do that. And we also have groups for LGBTQIA plus and women identifying birders. And it seems like maybe in the works to come is a space for BIPOC birders to get together and be outside. And also one of our engagement interns, who I don't think is on this call, Alexander, wrote a really great article about the native history of maple sugaring. And it just like really amplified that narrative that we weren't told, and how, we picture maple syrup and usually some older white man with a beard and a flannel and maybe some like draft horses or something, when really we should be picturing the folks who started the process in the first place, who taught those people how to sugar all those many years ago. So that's a great read. And yeah, I'll let Ciara talk now. I am excited about the work that we're doing, but I am also skeptical at the same time. I think we're talking the talk very well, and that I would love to see us walk the walk a little bit more, especially at the national level.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Well, Ciara, you've been a strong voice in our team for the last few months.
Me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm interested to kind of hear your reaction and being at Audubon at this moment in time.
I've definitely been learning a lot over the past couple of months, and I feel like I've developed a different perspective about what it's like working in a nonprofit field. I think organizations like Audubon, like the Sierra Club, like the Nature Conservancy, tend to have, like from the general public, like a very they're seen as safe, and like they're seen as like your grandma is probably a member of all of them, and like everyone's grandma belongs to Audubon, right? And I think because of that, Audubon is able to hide from a lot of accountability a lot of the times. And I know we've like had these conversations in staff meetings, and like these conversations are had now like in Audubon magazine and on the national level, but like about why Audubon would be required to get political in this moment. And I'm definitely glad that those conversations are being had at Audubon, and I'm especially thankful for the Audubon Vermont staff, who I feel like creates an environment where we can speak up among one another. But it is also frustrating, especially I feel like the way that national trainings around EDI work have been happening. It's a lot about like introspection, which is great, and especially white employees of Audubon should be doing a lot of introspection right now. But I also feel like by encouraging individual staff members to like really like look at their individual actions on a day-to-day level, while that is really important, I think that that also does take some accountability off of what's happening at an executive level, when you're like asking of individual employees to change the environment of something that's been institutionalized. And I don't really know what that is going to continue to look like moving forward. And I'm glad that like articles like Dr. Drew Lanham's article that recently came out have like sparked more intense conversations. And I hope that those conversations do continue to put pressure. I think for myself, I've kind of felt a little lost sometimes, like, oh, what's my role in all of this as an intern? Like, obviously, everyone wants to work somewhere that reflects their own values. Um, and I feel very grateful to work with a lot of people who hold the same values as I do. But it can be confusing when like Audubon is as big as it is, that it's like, oh, this great conversation that we're having between the Audubon Vermont staff, like how do we like make those values something seen on a national level? So I think there is a lot of good work happening, but there does need to be more done.
Yeah, well, this is not intended. This next statement is not intended to shift responsibility to you, the younger generation, to fix this set of issues. But I will say that it gives me incredible hope to watch the fearlessness with which your generation engages in this dialogue in a way that my generation has been fearful of and avoided in ways that have been destructive, quietly, passively destructive. And it's exciting for me to watch this conversation unfold. And I'm not shifting, I'm accepting full responsibility for my piece of the puzzle. But the other thing I'll say is that while it's kind of easy to see in real time the difference you can make in Vermont, and I have to admit to a certain amount of guilt that if I really cared about protecting the environment and changing the world, I would live in a place like Houston, perhaps, not in Northfield, Vermont, where I've now moved to. I don't know, I couldn't throw a rock and hit a house in any direction now. So I'm not sure that I'm really living my values. But at the same time, I do think the thing that has kept me in Vermont is that you can see change in real time. And my hope is that we can live our lives and our professional lives in ways that do have influence. And the same change that each of you have had on Audubon Vermont, and then writ large to a larger community throughout Vermont, is the same change that you will have throughout your careers. There's a great quote from Bobby Kennedy from a speech he gave down in South Africa to a group of students that I won't try to paraphrase too much, but essentially it's each one of us throws a rock into a pond and it creates ripples, and those ripples intersect with other ripples and they create waves that are so massive that they'll strike down the mightiest walls of oppression. And so that's the way I feel about it. Sorry, I didn't get so preachy. So maybe on a lighter note, Sarah, what do you have like a memory or anecdote or something that you can take from this experience to share with folks?
I definitely do. And then I also just wanted to add on that other question, I totally relate to Ciara feeling kind of confused and overwhelmed in one way, that I asked myself, okay, then what is in my control and what do I do at Audubon that I can change? And I teach a lot. So one of the things I do have control of is how I am, giving information to kids and interacting with them and showing them how I value like their personal space, their emotions. And that's kind of why, I mean, it's important to have an anti-racist bookshelf anyway, but I felt like that was a really tangible action that we could make happen. So now we know, what our bookshelf is made of and who's missing and what we need more of. And that's really valuable. Also just nice to take an inventory every once in a while because we have so many donated books. But yes.
Hey, Janelle, sorry to interrupt, Sarah. I just see that
Yeah.
Janelle jumping off. Janelle, I'm so happy you joined us. Thank you for being on. It's great to know you are in the community. And
Hi, David. Yes, I was planning to stay on, but I got a project that I have to finish before midnight. But it's nice to see you, and I will try to be on for other events this week.
thank you. Sorry, Sarah. It was very rude of me.
That's all right.
Sorry, Sarah.
Do have a favorite memory, and it happened during my first year. I have lots of favorite memories, but this one sticks out. And sorry to Audubon staff, you've heard this lots of times. But I used to be in charge of Playgroup back when that was happening, which is a free program where adults bring kids under the age of 5, and it's only an hour and a half long. And we usually just do a few activities around the center and, like circle up and they get to ask questions and hang out together. And a grandfather and his grandson would come together every single week. And well, it was really cool with the grandson was that he was actually kind of afraid of the outdoors, and his grandfather was taking him to like, you know, desensitize him a little bit. I'm talking like he would make contact with grass and start crying. And by the winter time, I mean, granted, the grass is covered up now, but he wasn't super keen on snow either. He was like sliding on his belly and on his back down our snowbanks. And he was just like such a different kid. And even sometimes he would show up and just start crying immediately, like knowing that he needed to go outside. And now he was just like, oh, hey, Sarah, and like came in and he was comfortable. And what made it even better was his grandfather noticed that we were running short on firewood during the winter. And we had like some big pieces that we usually don't use. We like to split them up into smaller pieces. So he brought his own axe, only in Vermont, BYO axe. And he was like, hey, will you watch my grandson for a second? And then just went out casually for like 15 minutes and split wood for me, and then came back and tended to the fire. So that was really, really a nice moment, especially just like building that relationship with them. And it felt good to know that like he noticed something and was like, oh, how can I help? And it was also hilarious. Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite ones. I have lots though.
Thank you, Sarah. Ciara, how about for you?
I also have so many favorite memories, and most of them are with the preschoolers. I feel like some of the highlights, also like even outside of teaching, I feel like some of the highlights of my week every week is like the before teaching, when it's like Sarah and Emily and I were waiting for all the kids and we're like eating our breakfast on the porch. But one little preschooler in particular who I feel especially bonded with, I've like, today was just an especially nice day to like see her kind of like come out of her shell more and be a little bit more social. But it's been interesting observing preschoolers like throughout COVID, especially ones that, you know, don't have younger siblings or siblings close in age to them. And like, you know, that coming to play school on Mondays or Fridays is like some of the only socialization with other kids that they're getting. And so in the fall, my first day back out teaching since pre-COVID, with these preschoolers, we were playing hide and seek, and one of the little kids like asked me to hide with her because she didn't want to hide alone. And so then she kind of like was just near me for the rest of the day. And at the end of the day, she was like, hey, do you know why I'm walking next to you? And I was like, no, why? And she was like, because I love you. And it was just so sweet. And then even just last week, she was like, I'm really glad you're here. And like the way that she's been able to like vocalize her feelings, she's very good at like, if she's upset, I'll like talk to her and be like, what do you need? And she's like, I think a hug would feel nice. And like to hear these kids being able to like vocalize their feelings. And I feel like a lot of them that we've been with for a long time, we've got to see like grow in that way. And like Sarah was saying before about the books that we're reading, I feel like Sarah and Emily and I all have like kind of shifted some of our focuses when we're reading to be like, oh, what emotions are you seeing on the characters in these pages? And like, just like seeing their emotional intelligence grow, and also having them like share their ability to express feelings to tell me that they like me or love me is especially just like very heartwarming.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
You moved Debbie to tears. So I think we're done with the kind of the formal kind of recorded part of this, and now we wanted to. I'm hopeful that I think the idea of this was that this would